I am Thomas, another edition here. This is a true crime story. We're traveling to the childhood home of a very notorious individual, despicable individual. This case happened around over 50 years ago. And a young family at the time, and had three small children. This is the case involving Joseph Baldi. This is the man that we will be talking about. This is Mr. Despicable. In 1970, a young family with the three small children, they traveled from Toronto to New York City for a family reunion. It was September of 1970. For the happy occasion, they were staying with their parents in a ground floor apartment in Jamaica, Queens. But in an instant, that celebration turned to tragedy. At around 4:30 the very next morning, the wife staggered into her husband's arm. Blood was gushing from a deep wound in her throat. Now, emergency doctors, they worked frantically, but the 23-year-old young mother died 4 hours later. Jewelry and money were missing from the room, so police speculated that a burglar had entered through a window and that the young woman confronted him. A sharp thrust of a knife and it ended her screams. The case went nowhere until the morning of March 20th of 1972, when a father went to awaken his daughter, his young daughter, who was 17, but he found her deceased, dead, in a blood-soaked bed, a knife wound in her chest. The killer was so silent and swift that the girl's 7-year-old brother, who shared the room, did not awake during the attack. Her bed was next to a window in their ground floor apartment in Jamaica, not far from the scene of the murder that we just talked about of the young family 2 years prior. A month later, in the same area, the slasher claimed another victim, a 21-year-old young woman, a secretary. At around 7 a.m. on April 13th, this young individual's sister went into a room to awaken her for work, and she found her dead, stabbed 4 times in the neck and back. Except for the plastic cup, a plastic cap, rather, of an electric hairdryer, she was naked. The dryer was still humming when her sister discovered the corpse. Her room was also in a ground floor apartment. As in the other slayings, the killer had entered through an open window sometime after midnight. There he is again, Mr. Despicable, Mr. Baldi. Seems to be a common thread here. More than 50 detectives were assigned to this case. Baldi would be known the terror of the Queen's Creeper, or he would sometimes be called the Monster of Queens. The Monster of Queens, rather. This is something that gripped this borough. Women at that time would not step outside without an escort. Streets were deserted. And a lot of people started getting big dogs. They started popping up in backyards, trained to bark at any stranger who would come too close. Throughout the spring, there were scattered reports of a silent fiend menacing women in the night. In one case, a woman asleep with her husband woke to see a man's arm and a hand clenching a long-bladed knife through a window. But her screams, it scared him off. A few days later, another sleeper was not so lucky. This time, the article would read in the paper, on the Daily News here, local paper, Night Prowler kills fourth Queens girl. That's the Daily News headline, June 18th of 1972. At around 3:45 a.m., husband and wife awoke to the sounds of their daughter, who was just 15 years old at the time, screaming. They ran to her room and they found her sitting upright in bed, blood gushing from her chest. He stabbed me. He put his hand in through the window, she told them, and then she would pass out. She never regained consciousness. The killer, well, he stood on a metal milk box to reach in the window. Now, police at the time had a few partial fingerprints from the windowsills, but not much else, except the killer's calling card, a slash bra. One had been found at every crime scene, whether it was the victim's or snatched from some type of a clothesline. He had a fetish. 4 days after the murder of this 15-year-old girl, police had a suspect. Two detectives spotted a skinny 6'3" man lurking around the neighborhood. He fit the description several girls have given to the police of a stranger who had been stalking them. The man was 31 years old, Joseph Baldi. He lived on welfare in a rooming house within blocks of his victim. He had an IQ of 79, a long criminal record, and this is the photo of the 15-year-old victim. So, IQ of 79, a long criminal record, and he had been in and out of mental institutions since 1962. In his room, the detectives, they found knives, a gun, and several girly magazines. He was no stranger to the police. The horrible truth about Joseph Baldi was that at the time of the last 3 killings, he should have been locked up. He was on the streets because of a breakdown in communication between the courts, the state mental hospital system, the 2 district attorney offices, and law enforcement agencies. There was the breakdown. In September of 1971, the police, they caught Baldi running from an apartment where there had been a burglary. When they stopped him, he pulled out a gun and shot at one of the officers, but he missed. Baldi was arrested, shuttled up to a Mid-Hudson psychiatric hospital, and then in November, down to Creedmoor State Hospital. Meanwhile, on December 23rd, 1971, a grand jury indicted him for attempted murder. Notice of the indictment that was sent to Mid-Hudson and never made it beyond that. Unaware of the indictment, and that is how Creedmoor looks present day. Creedmoor officials, they set Baldi free without notifying police on January 21st of 1972. If you've been following the story and you notice the timeline, the stabbing spree, the stabbing spree started soon afterward. During his interrogation, the suspect would lapse in and out of trances. He described the killings and recanted the murder. He recounted the murder of the 15-year-old girl at her house. And according to court documents, quote, "I think I hurt a girl," he told detectives. "I cut her." In 1974, he was convicted of this slaying and several other charges and was sentenced to 25 years to life. Now, his attorneys appealed. They argued that he did not get a fair trial because he was too crazy to understand his actions. We are approaching his childhood home right now, as you could see. It was a very modest home. Now, the appeals failed, and at a parole hearing in 1997, the parole board said his release would be incompatible with the welfare and safety of the community. Thankfully, this individual remained safely behind bars, where he could harm no one, until his death in 2009. There you see the childhood home of the Queens Creeper, or the Monster of Queens. It's those three windows right up there. And downstairs is a shop. It's closed. It's the three white windowsills there. That is his former house here in Richmond Hill. That is a picture of how the house looked like back then when he lived in it. His childhood home. And, it was an essential location, located close to everything. The subways, you're nearby the city. The airport is all within an arm's reach. And Jamaica, which is where the crimes happened, is a few moments away from his house. Thankfully, this man is no longer here.